Give me this. Great. Hi, everybody. My name is Jody Giannakopoulos, and you're here with the Addison Public Library live stream service. Tonight, we are so lucky to have Ada Cheng as our guest. We will be streaming to both Facebook and YouTube, where you can visit the recordings anytime at a later date or later even this evening. They should be up and ready to go. So lucky to have found this lady. She actually came to us and inquired if we were interested, and I was like, yes, we are. So we are definitely in for a treat. I will let Ada talk more about herself with you because she is an interesting lady. Just when you think you know what she's up to, there's more. So I think we're just going to get the tip of the iceberg tonight with some really amazing storytelling. I'm looking forward to this so much. I've watched a few performances of yours online, Ada, and you are dynamite stage presence. So I welcome you to the Addison Library, and please go ahead.
Thank you so much, Jody. I really appreciate you. Thank you, everyone, for being here. So I'm a professor turned storyteller and storytelling show producer. So since 2016, I have been using storytelling as a way to engage in sociological analysis and provide social critique. And so this is what I'm going to do tonight. What I want people to do is to treat this as a solo performance, and I will be sharing three stories. And we're going to wait until the end to have a conversation for Q&A. And so feel free, to have reactions or put in the chat for questions or comments, but just know that I won't be able to read them until I'm done with sharing the stories. And with each story, I will give you a sense of when it was written. And so you have an understanding of the context. So not quite the original version I wrote, not quite, it was in 2016. And then this current version with updated stories. So the first story is called Where is Home? And it was written in 2016. And then I'll talk about the other two stories and the context within which they were written as I'm about to tell them. So the first piece I'm going to share is called Where is Home? I live in Chicago. I've lived here for 20 years. Before I moved to New York, I was in Eugene, Oregon for 3 years. Before I moved to Eugene, I was in Taipei, Taiwan for 27 years. I was born in Taiwan 57 years ago. I came to this country 30 years ago. The last time I went back to Taiwan was 20 years ago. So where is home? How do you define it? By where you were born? By the duration of your stay? By the length of your absence? Or by the intensity of your emotions? I have lived in this country for over a quarter of a century. I still have a tough time answering questions like, are you from Chicago? Where are you from? These questions always throw me off. I have lived in different cities for different durations of time. And if you don't specify, I assume you want to know the origin of my birthplace. For some of us, it's not a city in the United States. It's another country, another continent. In my case, an island in the Pacific Ocean. So what does home mean, really? Whenever I'm asked, where are you from? Regardless of the intention of the questioner, I'm always reminded that Chicago is not quite home. I don't quite belong, not quite. I'm always reminded that I'm an alien, a transplant coming from somewhere easily identifiable and easily identified. Look at me, my skin color, my facial features, my appearance, my clothing, my demeanor, and my speech. Everything about me marks me. So after being a green card holder for 10 years and being an immigrant for 25 years, I finally decided to apply for American citizenship in 2015. 2 weeks after I did my citizenship interview, I received a notice from the Citizenship and Immigration Services of Homeland Security notifying me that my citizenship application had been approved, and my swearing ceremony was scheduled on May 27th, 2015. Do you remember May 2015? What was happening in different parts of this country, in cities like Baltimore, Cincinnati, Los Angeles, and Seattle? I'll come back to that later. My citizenship application process had been smooth, except the carelessness with which the USCIS staff handled my mail. They mailed out the notice without sealing the envelope, and the notice with my full legal name, my social security number, my green card number, and my address was sticking out of the envelope in my mailbox. Are you kidding me? I have been paying taxes in this country for 15 years, and you couldn't take 2 seconds to seal one of the most important documents in my life? I invited my then partner and the chair of the department at the university where I was a full-time faculty member to join me for the ceremony. So on May 27th, 2015, my guests and I arrived at a USCIS building in downtown Chicago right before 1 p.m. And we passed through the security check where I had to take off my shoes. I had to throw away my tape recorder because it was not allowed. And up to the third floor where there was a huge waiting area. After waiting for half an hour, I was called to stand in line in order to move to the large ceremony hall. And right at the entrance of the ceremony hall, there was a long desk, and 3 agents were sitting there. When it was my turn, the first agent took my green card and the notice. The second agent examined them and threw them into a big yellow envelope. And the third agent checked my name off the list. My heart sank when I turned in my green card. This was the only legal documentation in my possession to prove that I was documented or legal in this country. I didn't bring my Illinois ID with me that day, so I didn't have any ID to show who I was. But even if I did, they wouldn't have proved my legal status. So at that moment, I was without legal documentation. I started to panic as I walked into the big hall where hundreds of people like me had already been seated. It was very scary to be with hundreds of people without legal documentation. It was as if we were waiting for a collective sentence, because theoretically, any one of us could be arrested, locked up, or deported right there and then. But deported back to where? It has been 3 decades since I left Taiwan in 1991. The last time I went back to the island was 1999. I still have family there, but it hasn't been home for more than 3 decades. Going back there is not necessarily going home, but then where is home? My heart pounced every time I saw an agent walk toward my direction. And I kept on thinking to myself, is this a trap? Is the agent going to tell me that something was wrong with my application and they changed their mind about naturalizing me? Did they not believe me when I indicated on the application form and when I told them face to face that I never torture anyone, I never engaged in genocide, I was never part of a Nazi government in Germany, I was not a terrorist, I was not a communist, I never intend to attempt to overthrow the US government, I was never part of the guerrilla groups, I never sold weapons to anyone, I was never in prison, I never committed any felonies, I was not a gambler, I was not an alcoholic, I never abused any drugs, I never forced anyone to have sex, and I never solicit sex. I was a saint, still am one. Suddenly, I saw my then partner and the chair of the department enter the hall and take their seat. And the USCIS director walked up to the podium and announced that we would start the ceremony. I felt a sense of relief. The citizenship ceremony included watching documentaries about US immigration history and American exceptionalism, listening to speeches, pledging allegiance to the flag, singing national anthem. I'm not going to sing tonight because I don't torture people. And receiving the certificate of naturalization. In the first documentary, the narrator talked about how we, like the previous generations of the immigrants, that we were fortunate to escape war, poverty, and political and religious repressions to come to this country to pursue our American dream. I suddenly felt terrible that I invited my chair to the ceremony. You see, my chair was a 70-year-old African-American man. His ancestors didn't come to this country voluntarily. In his parents' time, people of different races were not allowed to swim in the same swimming pool. And what was happening in May 2015? Activists like Black Lives Matter have been protesting against police brutality for quite some time. Baltimore was particularly under scrutiny because of the death of Freddie Gray. War is not outside of the United States. War is right here in the United States, in our own backyard, against our own people. What was my celebration was not necessarily his to have, even though he was very happy for me, but it was also very difficult for him to sit there and to listen to the rhetoric about American exceptionalism as a Black man. Our stories were connected, yet very different under the system of white supremacy. So I did complete my citizenship ceremony and received my certificate of naturalization. And this is now the legal documentation to prove that I am indeed a legitimate American citizen. I didn't pay attention to it when I received it, and I immediately locked it up in my safe without realizing I would need it again a year later. So this is my certificate of naturalization. There are two numbers on it. There is this numbers for the certificate, 37439313. There is another number, A94534343. Do you know what A stands for? I did not realize the significance of these two numbers until when I tried to register for Affordable Care Act health insurance in December 2016. I was asked to provide these two numbers when I identify myself as a naturalized citizen. And that A stands for alien. That's my alien registration number, a number I carried for decades before becoming a citizen, and a number I will continue to carry. These two numbers are for registration, and there's always, always a registry for aliens. Most people would assume that the process of naturalization enables immigrants like me, and let me be very clear, a privileged one, to assimilate into this country, to be part of this country, and to finally be home. I have contributed to this country by educating young minds at the university for decades. And here is the irony, not as a citizen, but as an immigrant. First on my H-1B visa, and then with my green card. This country has entrusted immigrants with some of her most important jobs, including raising children, caring for the sick, cleaning houses, and educating young minds. Yet we are forever unwelcome. As much as I try to blend in by achieving the American dream, this country, or shall I say this government, is never going to let me forget that I am indeed an alien and will forever be one. So this is my American journey, American dream pursued and achieved, but I'm still not home. Thank you. So this is the first piece, and it was written in late 2016. The second piece was written toward the end of 2019. So it was very recent. And it was entitled, Dear White Woman. Dear white woman, I regretted saying nothing to you. So I'm writing this letter. It was a good day, that first Friday in October 2019. Sunny and cool. It was around 2 p.m. I just finished presenting my gender-based violence workshop at a medical school at UIC. I had started this new job with the university in July, and this workshop was the first major one I had to conduct with this new position. I was happy because I thought everything went well, so well that the student organizers told me that they wanted me back in spring. I was feeling proud, standing in front of the medical school building entrance on Polk Street. When I ordered a lift to return to my office, you were right there dropping off someone. I was elated that I didn't have to wait long. The day is really going my way, I thought to myself. I got into a car and said, thank you so much. How are you? My standard greeting to a Lyft driver. You glanced at me through the mirror and said, I'm good. Where are you from? Just like that. We're sitting inches from each other, yet the chasm between us suddenly feels like 1,000 miles. I paused. Where are you from? It's one of my most dreaded questions. I was asked so very often before becoming a citizen in 2015. It was simple when I first arrived in this country from Taiwan as a student back in 1991. I was foreign, after all, with my stronger accent and wearing clothing I brought from home. Yet with each passing year or decade, this question has become more complicated and layered. I can no longer answer it with ease. This question was posed to me even after I became a citizen in May 2015. That same afternoon after the naturalization ceremony, and the days and the weeks and the months and the years afterwards, that question never stopped. Why would I have expected anything different? Their certificate of naturalization, that piece of paper certifying my citizenship status, didn't change anyone's perception of me as someone from somewhere else. My status might have changed, but my face didn't. I mean, my accent wasn't that thick, so thick that you would mistake me as foreign. You had no other reference than this face of mine, the only marker of difference, just like a million other faces from Asia. And when I hesitated, you asked, originally, like I didn't know what you were asking, like I didn't already have a script for that question, like I hadn't answered the same question over and over, like I hadn't said originally myself many times before, like my silence was my lack of understanding of your words or English. No, I was killing you softly in the back seat with my gaze, filled with both sorrow and rage, calculating how much I should let your remark and therefore you shape the rest of my day or days after that. When I told you I was from Taiwan, you started talking about how your brother-in-law was working there and how he loved it. I asked you which city he was living on the island. You couldn't say. You simply went on and on about his beautiful experiences in Asia. I wanted to tell you, I don't care. I mean, do you even know the difference between Taiwan and Thailand? Because many Americans can't even distinguish between these two countries since the first part for these two words sounds exactly the same. I wanted to lecture you about profiling though. A softer type of profiling, the type of profiling that doesn't kill us, but it marks us as different. It tells us we don't belong. It is a form of racial profiling masked as cultural curiosity, often loved by both liberals and conservatives alike, pretending to be cosmopolitan, yet culture is no substitute for race. You might ask, does it mean I can't ask this question at all? Of course, it is not that you can't ask it. It is how and when you ask the question. It is the context within which you ask it. Context is everything. Ask yourself, is this how you greet every human being you come across on your drive, in the party, on the street? Or do you direct this phrase to only people with certain facial features deemed as foreign and alien? Or shall we say, exotic? There are millions of people with facial features similar to mine who were born in the United States. This is a place they call home. They're not from somewhere else. They have always been here. By asking them that question, you are telling them that they don't fit the image of what an American should be. Where are you from marks someone as an outsider, outside of the norm and the standard against which you used to judge them. On the other, against the white faces you count as American. Whether I was indeed born somewhere else is beside the point. I might be a citizen on paper, but it is still a long way to belong and to call this country home, even after 3 decades. Let me tell you a story. I once performed my solo nakwai at Des Moines, Iowa. During the talkback, a middle-aged white woman vehemently disputed my comment about the racial implications of this phrase. She insisted that she could not be racist since her husband sitting right next to her was a Chinese man from Hong Kong. It was as if her physical proximity to a person of color could excuse or exonerate her of any bias or prejudice. She said that she was simply curious about other cultures. Insisting on her good intentions, she wouldn't stop arguing until another white audience asked her to ponder this question: who is in the rightful place to define racism? I believe you, if you say you were simply trying to be friendly, except benevolent intentions don't always matter, especially when they lead to harmful impact. Not on you, but on me. It should have been a great day for me. Instead, I spent the 7-minute ride debating if I should get out of the car, if saving $5 was worth any dignity, if I should educate you as opposed to simply enjoying my existence, if I should trade dignity for convenience, if I should stay quiet while struggling with my own conscience and doubting if I did the right thing with my silence. All the energy that should have been reserved for my joy that day was wasted on you while you were so oblivious to everything. I used to intervene until my energy was completely drained, until I no longer had joy in life. And then I realized this: not every fight should be my fight. I have to pick my battle just to preserve some sanity, so I can thrive, not just survive. So I sulked in the back seat and decided that I would write you a letter entitled "Dear White Woman." I consider this piece your compensation for my short ride with you. Best, Ada. So this is the second piece, and it's called "Dear White Woman." Now, the third piece that I'm going to share is called "A Letter to My Younger Self." And I want to explain the context within which how this piece came about. I work at UIC as the education and outreach specialist, and I do workshop and outreach on gender-based violence. And this student sent this email, most likely because the student didn't know where to send it, and it arrived at my desk. So this piece is a series of email exchanges between myself and the student. The incident itself took place in February 2020. So this piece was written a year ago. I didn't change anything for this performance because I want you to get a sense in terms of where I was, what I was thinking, my own anxiety, without having to witness the intensification of anti-Asian racism during this past year. And so this piece is called "A Letter to My Younger Self." Dear university staff, hello. I want to report an insulting incident that happened to us today. My friends and I were at this building trying to grab some coffee. We were waiting in line, and finally, when it was our turn to order, we stepped forward. During that short time, we heard an absurd racist joke that people at the cashier made, saying, "Watch out for the coronavirus." As everyone knows, the coronavirus is a global issue that has taken away more than 500 innocent lives. Treating us as that virus is both humiliating and insulting to the people who are suffering and fighting for that contagious disease. It is very unfortunate that this occurred during the Black History Month, the month that we believe that no one should be discriminated by the color of their skin. I hope you examine this issue. We sincerely want an apology for this inconvenience. Sincerely, student. Dear student, thank you for the message. I'm very sorry this happened to you. I would like to meet in person to discuss the situation further. Let me know when you can stop by. Ada. Dear Ada, thank you for your kindness. We were all furious about the incident. However, after knowing that there are people who actually care for minorities like us, it gives us pride knowing that we chose to come to the school. Again, thank you for offering us the option to deal with this matter. But we have decided not to make a scene. Student. Dear student, I don't think you will ever read this message. I do hope at some point you will tell this story on your own. I haven't been able to sleep for days since I received your email. That last sentence, we have decided not to make a scene, hit me hard. That sentence has filled me with sadness. It feels like someone has driven a knife slowly into my heart. I'm not going to die from it, but my heart aches and bleeds with each gentle cut and push. Your message was the first complaint I received, but it was not the first one I have heard. Since the outbreak of the coronavirus, we have seen an increase of hatred toward Chinese people, people of Asian descent, or Asian Americans in general. Physical assaults have taken place, racial slurs hurled, suspicious looks cast, masks put on specifically when Asian people are present. Otherwise, socially conscious people making jokes and references about the virus and Chinese people. Businesses in Chinatown plummeted due to misinformation, xenophobia, and racism. In a world where racism is often seen between Black and white, discrimination, prejudice, racism, xenophobia toward and against Asians are often taken for granted and normalized, that even UC at Berkeley briefly posted something online along the line. Xenophobia is a normal response after the outbreak. Our own president insisted on calling the virus Chinese or Wuhan virus, knowing fully well that a pandemic will bring out pre-existing hatred, xenophobic sentiments, and racist assaults against people of Asian descent. Different universities sent warning emails to students about the virus, yet very few made public statements denouncing anti-Asian racism. We don't label any germ, disease, illness, and virus white when they wiped out Native American tribes. Why do we label Corona Asian? This pandemic shows how easily we, as Asian Americans, can go from being model minority to yellow peril in this country within seconds. But what I want to write here is not about the virus. It is about that last sentence of yours. We have decided not to make a scene. I truly see you because you remind me of my younger self, when I used to believe that people would understand where I was coming from and empathize with my position if I were polite enough, respectful enough, articulate enough, or liked enough. And then it dawned on me one day, my degree of politeness, respectfulness, or likability has little to do with whether people can grasp the complexity of issues. For many, they understand them all alone. In my or our culture, I was taught since I was young to be quiet, to not speak up, to not challenge authorities, and to keep peace and maintain harmony. I had to work very hard to develop my own voice and to have one. When I was younger, I tried hard to balance between having a voice and wanting to be liked, having ideas and opinions and being seen to opinionated and loud, and telling people how I really felt and what I really thought, and not wanting to alienate anyone with my truth. I still struggle with that, and I'm in my 50s. The reality is this: there's no balance. It is a lose-lose situation for me as a woman. I do have the benefit of racial perception. I'm hardly seen as militant or aggressive as an Asian woman, even when I am, compared to a Black woman who can easily be seen as aggressive, even when she simply being assertive. My body, as much as it may be sexually objectified, exoticized, or violated, is not seen as threatening, thus allowing me to freely navigate the world without anyone calling the police on me. And we know that the ways our bodies are perceived can have life and death consequences. But the worst part is this: when you don't practice speaking up for yourself, you end up losing the only voice you have, your own. I want you to remember this: silence can be a strength, but it isn't always a virtue. Being quiet doesn't always bring you the peace. Being polite doesn't always keep you out of trouble. Being respectful doesn't always get you the respect in return. Please learn to tell your own stories, as I can't always tell stories for others. Learn to shout on top of your lung. Make a scene. Be the troublemaker. Be the trouble for yourself and others. It's time. It's time. Ada. Oh, thank you. So this is the last piece, and it's called A Letter to My Younger Self. So this conclude my solo performance, 3 stories, and I use 3 stories to illustrate issues affecting Asian Americans. And so I started telling stories in 2016, and I started doing solo performance in 2017. And so what I have done is simply take my solo and I travel to different cities in the country, and then talk to people, and then engage in conversation. I don't necessarily have any agenda. And so this is what we're going to do. We're going to have a talk back. It's a Q&A, or you can simply talk about, what resonated with you, how you feel, and the issues that stood out for you. So this is what we're going to do. You're free to unmute yourself, make comments, and if you want, you can also type in the chat in terms of the questions or comments that you have. Thank you so much, Kathy. Thank you. And feel free to just kind of talk about in terms of your thoughts.
I have a question, Ada.
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, I'm bouncing back maybe a little bit loud in your room. How old were you when you came to the States for the first time?
I was an adult, 27.
Oh, you were a grown woman.
Yes.
And what was your reason for coming initially?
I came here as a student.
Yeah.
So I came here in 1991 as a student, foreign student. I was in Eugene, Oregon first. And then afterwards, I went to Austin, Texas, UT Austin for my PhD. And then once I got my PhD, I moved from Texas to Chicago. And I started teaching at DePaul University in 2001.
Okay.
Yeah.
So then you've moved around, but you came back to Chicago.
No. Chicago was 2001. Since 2001, I moved here. I was in Eugene, Austin, and then Chicago.
That's right. I'm sorry. And then bringing you to Chicago, tell me again, what brought you to DePaul, or was it like the job at DePaul?
I got a tenure track position at DePaul University. So I started teaching at DePaul in the sociology department in 2001, and I got tenured in 2006. And then I left DePaul formally in June 2016 to pursue storytelling.
Okay. And okay, so one of the things, things get heavy, but also people have to know you do comedy. You do stand-up comedy.
I did. So this is really interesting. This is interesting you brought that up. So when I was at the university, that explained the reason why I left the university. Part of it is, I was an award-winning teacher. So every quarter, students would tell me, gosh, you change the way we think about the world, you change our mind. But then at some point I realized, sure, I can change students' mind, but I didn't necessarily feel that I was connecting with them emotionally. And I also felt that when students left the classroom, they would go back to business as usual, meaning they will go back to their surroundings. But the things that at the time I realized that people have to act, do something to make the world a better place, right? But people don't act just because they have the right information. People act because they feel emotionally compelled to. That's really important. Education, right? We give students the information, the right information. It doesn't necessarily compel them to act. And I feel as much as in academia, I was talking about theories and constructs, jargons, data. I have all that, but I wasn't connecting with students emotionally. I was only touching them intellectually. So I was very much looking for something that I was able to engage with people, not only to challenge them intellectually, but also engage with them emotionally. So one day, this is a real story. One morning I woke up, I thought to myself, I think I'll do better as a stand-up comedian. Seriously. And I immediately went online to sign up for improv class. And I'll tell you why. When I was teaching undergraduate classes, particularly freshman, sophomore, at the time, I would use stand-up comedy clips as a way to provoke class discussion. And the interesting part is that, some of the comics I would no longer use, but it is interesting, the comedians were actually making some very poignant critiques and observations of our world. And you know how teaching young people, you want to make it fun, you want to make it entertaining. So in my class, I will use, and you don't want to just straightforward lecture. So I will find things to make it interesting, and I will use comedy clips. And that's how one day I woke up, I thought, I think I was right. I would try stand up. But I started with improv, and then I stumbled into storytelling. And I remember at some point I was doing improv, storytelling, and stand-up comedy all at once. And then when I go to do open mic at bars for stand-up comedy, I thought to myself, I will become an alcoholic faster than before I become good. Let me just focus on one thing. So I decided to focus on storytelling. So that's how I even went from doing more comedy stuff, then doing more storytelling. and then I use storytelling to engage in social critiques and talk about issues, urgent social concerns of our time. That's kind of how they all came about.
Well, I think, it's humor. Like I always say, comedians aren't funny people in real life oftentimes. That it would be, there's a darkness to humor that I find appealing. And I think that you can go to places using humor that are more, I don't want to say inconspicuous, but you can go to unusual places in people's minds and references that people would make. But storytelling is its own thing. What you gave tonight is like letters, letters and recount. I think that's beautiful. Do you do other kinds of storytelling, such as like traditional storytelling?
I don't necessarily do traditional storytelling. I usually tell personal stories. And my telling story, storytelling has evolved. Lately, I have been writing a lot. In terms, I've become more. In the beginning, it was more like the first piece. It's more straightforward narration, right? I just tell. And then now, more and more, I decided to simply let's say use writing a letter. So I evolved into using different ways to express. For example, the last piece is more theatrical in the sense it becomes a dialogue, right? I can tell like a narration, my students say this, I say this, but I decided to simply put it um, uh, as if two people are having dialogue. And so I started to experiment very different ways to tell stories. It can be straightforward narration, but and then it can be a letter. And so the way I think about storytelling is this. I mean, is some stories have to be told, some stories have to be sung, some stories, right, have to be acted out, like have to be done in dialogue, right? And so the more tools, right, the first one is more like a personal narrative. The more tools, some stories have to be told through poetic form. So the more tools that you have, the easier you know how to better tell a story. So now increasingly, I would tell stories very differently. Some stories I may tell in a very poetic form, depending on the nature. Some stories, it will be straightforward dialogue. Uh, and so it all depends on the stories, and you switch the genre based on the nature of the story.
Right. It seems like you found like your not not your groove, but your like home in storytelling, maybe, because you have really a lot of options. I like storytelling for that reason. I admire so much people who can actually memorize a tale and tell it. That is to me like magical. But it's also something that I think, again, it's like it parallels with comedy in that it's very revealing and very visceral. You can really bring out things that are not necessarily common topics of conversation in ways that, since you're reflecting and having your own experience, you're bringing out the wider issue, which is the construct for dialogue, right?
Absolutely. It's something to think about. For example, today's topics is I could sit here and give a formal presentation on
Right.
issues affecting Asian Americans, and probably you wouldn't remember it because it's dry, it's facts. But if I tell stories, oftentimes it's you can't dispute other people's story. Just like Jody, if you tell me something happened to you, my first response would be disputing, right, how you tell it. I would simply listen to you, empathize with you, put myself in your shoes, right? And so what storytelling is doing in this case is for you to listen to my stories, and then I use stories to highlight, for example, my own ambivalence and what does it mean to have citizenship, but it doesn't necessarily mean a sense of belonging. I can simply say it in a very academic way, or I can tell you the story for you to get what I mean. The second one, think about perpetual foreigner. I can say, well, Asian Americans are oftentimes seen as perpetual foreigners. People may not understand what I mean, but then if I say, guess what? Everywhere we go, oftentimes people would ask, where are you from? And for me, I'm here as I came here as a foreigner 30 years ago. And in 5 years, it might still be okay. 10 years after that, I thought, how do I even start answering that question? 15, 20 years, 30 years, that I started to have to prepare a script and ask, well, how far do I need to push back? And imagine if people who were born here, they're Americans, they have always been here. So then for outsiders, then they understand that when you ask, where are you from, oftentimes is very loaded. Or the last one, right? If you think about the effect of the virus and anti-Asian racism, um, I didn't have to witness this whole what took place this past year. I mean, a year ago, I could already see what was happening and foresee what was to come. And so, but the last piece, what I really wanted to say is about how Asian Americans oftentimes feel that because they are not as bad, right? We fall into the trap of oppression Olympics. Our situation is not as bad. So we don't oftentimes feel comfortable talking about violence we experience or discrimination experience. We're taught that we shouldn't rock the boat. We should save face for other people. We should keep peace. And what I really want to say to people is that it's an important time to talk about these issues. So using these ways to present this information, Jody, for tonight, you'll probably think about these stories, right?
I'm there. I'm there. I'm in the line with you, waiting to get the naturalization show on the road. And I'm in the lift with you saying, why do you have to ask that? But then I also realized, when I was talking to you the first time, I did sincerely want to know what your story was and where you were from. But it's not the first thing on my mind. The first thing on my mind is business. It's, we're taking care of business. But I think that you're bridging the gap in a way that, you're entering into territory that people sometimes are uncomfortable with, but ultimately benefit from tremendously. That's the dialogue that is needing to happen now.
Absolutely. I mean, the huge thing is, even though I'm sharing my stories, these stories are applicable to many different racial ethnic communities. Here's also the thing, even the last piece, right? When I talk about how maintain harmony, not to challenge authority, guess what? Women can relate to that, right? So here's the thing is, even though it seems that I'm telling personal stories from me, from an Asian American woman's perspective, but there are places that I know that, Jody, you don't need to live my life, that you can relate to, right? Exactly. When I talk about when I was younger, I struggle with being seen too loud, too opinionated. I know women can relate to that, regardless of your racial identity, right? And so what's powerful about storytelling is that we don't need to live each other's life, but we can identify some way. And through that, we build intimacy, we build empathy, we build understanding and compassion, and hopefully action.
Exactly. And it's so humanizing. It's just, thank you. It's so, you know, when I hear you talking about these visceral reactions, I'm thinking about so many different kinds of scenarios and so many different ways this is going on a daily basis all over. And yes, it's like you can feel that way as a woman, you could feel that way as a different person in society's cultures. It's definitely never a waste of time to reveal what your experience is, because people may have no idea, you know. Uh, Terrific. I thank you so very much. We are right now at the 1 hour mark, and really, I can't thank you enough. There's so much more that you have in your toolkit, but I think we got to see the beginnings of one way you go about bringing about mentality change. And oh yes, we got a big thank you from one of our
Oh,
audience
thank you so much.
members.
Yeah.
Yes.
And somebody sent me a private message. Yeah.
Great, great. Well, this was certainly a valuable exercise, and I really do appreciate it. I look forward to our viewers on YouTube and Facebook also being able to have the opportunity to hear you speak. It's really great and very, very visual. I was really there with you, Ada. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you so much. You know, something different for people to experience. It really is about not just we operate from the right intellect a lot, and what I really want to do is to go back to the feelings and the heart, and then to balance both. Yeah.
Yeah, you could I could tell you got a big heart, Ada, for sure. You got a big heart. Thank you again.
Thank you so much for having me, Jody.
Looking
Bye.
forward to
Thank you,
following
Don.
your
Thank you.
career. Yeah, thanks, Don. I can't wait to see what you do next. Ada, what's your website?
Renegade Ada Jen.
Renegade Ada Cheng. Okay,
Yes.
very cool. Thanks again.
Thank you. Bye.
See you.